What if life after 60 isn't a decline, but a deeper awakening? Buddhist teachings. Have you ever wondered what truly awaits us beyond the rush of careers, the duties of family, and the endless demands of modern life? What if I told you that after 60, life doesn't end, it begins again in a quieter, deeper, more luminous way? Welcome to a journey that's not just about aging, but about awakening. In this video, we'll explore what it truly means to live mindfully after 60, not as a concept, but as a way of life. Drawing from timeless Buddhist philosophy and soul-stirring personal stories, this is not just another video. It's a mirror, a map, a meditation. And here's the promise: by the time we reach the final word, you will feel something shift, not out there, but in here. So don't just skim, don't click away, because hidden in these chapters are lessons that could transform how you see your remaining years. Like, comment, and subscribe to stay grounded in this journey. And remember, this video is filled with profound insights that you'll want to carry with you. Watch it to the very end and you'll see why. Part 1: The Garden of the Mind. Somewhere after the age of 60, something begins to shift. Life no longer pulls you in the same way. The outer noise fades slowly, and what remains is a quiet invitation to look within. The distractions, once so urgent, now feel distant, and in this stillness something stirs, a memory, a breath, a space you've long forgotten. This is not decline, this is not loss. It is the slow and sacred turning of the mind toward its true home. In the teachings of the Buddha, there is a powerful truth: what you focus on, you become. This is not a metaphor, it is a law as real as gravity. Your attention is your life force. Whatever you give it to will grow, whatever you neglect will wither. And as you age, as you begin to simplify, the question becomes urgent: what are you watering? The mind is like a garden. Left unattended, it will grow wild with habits, old fears, and stories you no longer need. But with presence, with care, it becomes a place of peace. You don't need to rip out every weed. You only need to begin feeding the flowers. This is what it means to age with awareness, to stop feeding resentment, to stop pouring energy into regret, to notice moment by moment where your attention is going, and to choose again, not with force, but with kindness. Take the story of Gerald, a veteran in his 80s. Haunted for decades by memories he could not silence, he found peace not in forgetting, but in tending. One spring, his granddaughter gave him a tomato plant. He didn't want it, but he watered it, and then again, until one morning he held a ripe tomato in his palm and cried, not because the war was over, but because he had remembered he could still grow something. This is the path, not dramatic, not fast, but steady, a choice made again and again to return to this breath, this step, this very moment, to let go of what no longer serves, to forgive what no longer matters, and to rest in the quiet knowing you are still here. And that is more than enough. As the Buddha taught, your mind becomes what you dwell upon. So dwell in compassion, dwell in stillness, dwell in truth, and let this season of your life be not an ending, but a slow, radiant blooming into the simplicity of being. Part 2: Sitting with what is. There is a sacred moment that arrives when one stops resisting what is, not with resignation, but with an open heart. After 60, life offers a strange mercy. You begin to see that so much of your suffering wasn't caused by the events themselves, but by your refusal to accept them. The Buddha called this the second arrow. The first arrow is what life brings: illness, loss, change. The second arrow is our reaction: resistance, anger, denial. We cannot always avoid the first arrow, but the second, that one we hold. Letting go of resistance doesn't mean approving of everything. It means choosing peace over punishment. It means whispering, even in pain, this too belongs. For decades, maybe you've tried to fix, solve, or run from parts of yourself. But now there is nothing left to outrun. There is only the invitation to sit softly, bravely with what is, the aching joints, the slowed pace, the unresolved story. the tender heart that still feels so much. There's a kind of beauty in this softening, like snow melting on old stone, like a hand resting on a shoulder, saying without words, you no longer need to fight. Consider Helen, age 78, who had spent most of her adult life angry at her sister. The betrayal was real, the wound deep, but one morning while watering her plants, she felt something shift, not forgiveness exactly, but fatigue. She was tired of the story, tired of holding the second arrow. She sat down and cried, not for what was done, but for all the years she spent reliving it. In that moment, she didn't erase the past. She simply stopped arguing with it. That, too, is awakening. To sit with what it means to be with this body, this life, this breath, without needing it to be different. It is not giving up, it is waking up. Each time you place a hand on your heart and say, this too, you are doing the deepest spiritual work. You are saying to the wounded places, I will not abandon you. You are not too old to heal. You are simply wise enough now to begin. Let this be the practice, not changing everything, but welcoming everything. Not escaping, but embracing. And in that embrace, discovering a quiet kind of freedom, the freedom of no longer needing to be at war with what is. Part 3, the silence that heals. As we grow older, we begin to hear silence differently. Once, it may have felt lonely. Now it feels like company. It doesn't ask anything of us, it simply stays. Silence is not the absence of sound, it is the presence of stillness. In that stillness, the truth has room to emerge, not loudly but gently, like mist rising from morning grass, like breath returning after a deep cry. Many of us spent our younger years filling every space with noise. Conversations, television, to-do lists, background music. We were afraid of the quiet, because in quiet things come up. Grief we buried, questions we avoided, regrets we silenced. But now, in this softer season of life, we are strong enough to face them. To sit in the silence and let whatever needs to rise, rise. There is a reason monks retreat into forests and caves. It is not to escape the world. It is to meet it more truthfully, and we too can create a retreat within our daily life. A chair by the window, a walk without devices, a pause before speaking. These are sacred spaces, no less holy than temples. Silence has its own language. It teaches us that we are not our thoughts, that not everything needs a response. That peace isn't found by fixing the world, but by resting in our awareness of it. Consider Daniel, a retired teacher. After his wife passed, he found himself overwhelmed by noise, not from the world, but from his own mind. Memories, regrets, anxieties. One afternoon, he turned off everything and sat in his garden, just the breeze, the birds, and him. He cried, then laughed, then simply sat. In that stillness, he realized the silence wasn't empty, it was full of presence. To sit in silence is not to do nothing, it is to open everything, to let the mind settle like dust in sunlight. To let the heart speak without words, let silence be your companion, let it teach you how to listen again, not just to others but to yourself, to the voice beneath the noise, the one that says you are whole, you are held, you are home. Part 4, the compass of kindness. In a world that often feels rushed and reactive, kindness can seem small. But for those who have lived long enough to see how things unfold, kindness is never small. It is a quiet power, a steady compass. It brings us home when we forget the way. After 60, many people reflect on the sharpness they once carried, the need to be right, the quick judgments, the withheld forgiveness, and many begin to soften, not out of weakness, but wisdom. You begin to understand that most people are doing their best with what they know, including yourself. Kindness does not mean being passive. It means choosing to see with gentler eyes. It means asking before we speak, is this necessary? Is this helpful? Is this loving? The Buddha spoke often about right speech, right action, and right intention. At the heart of all three is kindness, not as a performance, but as a deep way of being. Consider Margaret, who spent her youth raising 5 children and working nights. Her life was survival. There wasn't much time for kindness then, but now in retirement she writes letters to strangers, encouragements, blessings. Words she wished someone had sent her. She says, "I couldn't change my past, but I can add softness to someone else's day." Kindness can be as simple as a patient silence, a smile that lingers, a willingness to let someone else go first. These are not small gestures, they are sacred choices, and perhaps most importantly, kindness must turn inward. Many people over 60 carry a quiet guilt about the things they didn't do, the people they couldn't save, the mistakes they can't forget. But guilt is not the path, gentleness is, forgiveness is. Each time you speak to yourself with compassion, you untangle a knot that may have been there for decades. You begin to trust your own heart again. You begin to walk lighter. Let kindness be your guide, not because it's easy, but because it's true. Let it shape your days, your words, your presence. And in doing so, you may discover that the smallest acts of tenderness are the ones that last the longest in the memory of others and in your own soul. Part 5. Walking with Impermanence. There is perhaps no teaching more central to the Buddha's wisdom than this. All things are impermanent. All forms, all feelings, all moments, they arise, they shimmer, and they pass. And yet this truth, though universal, becomes startlingly vivid after 60. Friends leave, bodies change, familiar rhythms disappear. We find ourselves saying goodbye to what we once thought would last forever. But within this tenderness is a doorway, not to despair, but to awakening. To walk with impermanence is not to befriend loss, but to understand it, to witness life in its fleeting beauty. Like watching cherry blossoms fall, so lovely because they do not remain, this is not cruelty, it is clarity. For years, Alina kept every birthday card her late husband wrote. Not because she was clinging, but because they reminded her how precious presence is. Each one, she said, was a whisper, "Love this while it's here." Buddhism teaches that clinging leads to suffering, and the antidote is not detachment, but appreciation. When we accept that nothing lasts, we learn how to truly see. We hold each hand with reverence. We watch each sunset as if it were the last. We say, "I love you" without delay. There is pain in letting go. But greater pain comes from pretending we don't have to. And so, aging offers a gift, the chance to embrace the truth we've always known and live more fully because of it. Let impermanence be a bell, not a curse. Let it wake you to your days, not frighten you from them. Let it soften your grip, open your heart, and deepen your gaze. Because when you stop trying to hold life still, you begin to experience its sacred movement, the dance of all things fleeting and all things eternal. You begin to live not in fear of endings, but in awe of moments, and in that awe you find peace. Part 6. The Wisdom of Slowness. In youth, the world urges speed, achieve, acquire, ascend. But after 60, the soul begins to crave something different, slowness, not delay, but depth, not stagnation, but stillness. The kind of living that notices the sway of leaves, the warmth of a cup of tea, the feeling of breath moving in and out. Slowness is not a failure to keep up. It is a choice to align with life as it truly is. Unfolding moment by moment without rush, the Buddha himself walked slowly, deliberately. Each step was a meditation, a statement, "I am here, I am awake." We live in a culture that fears slowness. It associates it with irrelevance, with weakness. But what if slowness is not a deficit, but a doorway? What if, in slowing down, we finally begin to see? Ruth, once a busy nurse, now spends her mornings watching birds from her porch. She names them, she greets them. And in doing so, she says, "I finally feel like I'm part of the world, not just passing through it." To move slowly is to give life the attention it deserves. It is to walk through your home with reverence. To cook as if you're composing a prayer. To pause in conversation, letting silence speak too. Slowness teaches us that meaning isn't found in what we accumulate, but in what we attend to. A lingering gaze, a thoughtful gesture, a mindful step. These become our offerings, our teachings, and perhaps most tenderly, slowness allows us to meet ourselves again, not the self who is always achieving, but the self who simply is, who breathes, who feels, who remains. In slowness, we rediscover rhythm, the natural pace of the heart, the spaciousness of presence, the grace of being where we are. Let the world rush if it must. You have earned the right to slow down. Not to fall behind, but to arrive fully, gently, and awake. Part 7. Returning to the body. As the years unfold, we begin to feel the body in new ways. Joints stiffen, energy wanes, aches appear where there once was ease. And yet, this aging form is not a betrayal, it is a call to return. In Buddhism, the body is a temple, not of perfection, but of presence. It is the doorway through which we experience the now. Too often, in younger years, we treated the body like a machine, pushing, criticizing, overriding its needs. But now a new invitation arises, to listen, to honor, to tend. The breath rising and falling, the heartbeat steady and sure, the feet touching the floor. These become sacred signals, grounding us in the moment. And in that grounding we find a kind of trust. Life still moves through us. Claire, a former dancer in her 70s, can no longer leap or twirl, but each morning she stretches slowly, deliberately. Her movements are no longer for performance. They are for prayer. She says, "I move now to say thank you, not to my past body, but to this one, the one still holding me." Mindful movement, whether it's walking, yoga, gardening, or simply rising with awareness, becomes a spiritual practice. Not to fix the body, but to befriend it. To notice the pain, yes, but also the strength. The quiet miracle of being alive. Aging is not an enemy. It is a teacher. It teaches us patience. It asks us to slow down. It reminds us that this body, though changing, is still ours to love. Let your body be your companion, not your complaint. Let it guide you gently back into the now, into the sacred simplicity of breath, of touch, of being, because even in its limitations, the body holds wisdom. Even in its wear, it holds wonder, and even in stillness, it holds the dance of life. Part 8. The inner home. There comes a point when we realize that no external place, not a house, a country, or even a relationship, can fully be our home. Especially after 60, when roles change, children leave, and familiar patterns dissolve, we are invited to ask, where truly is home? The Buddha taught that the true refuge lies within, not in possessions, not in permanence, but in awareness, in knowing the mind, in observing the breath, in resting in the present moment. Home, then, is not a structure. It is a state of being, a way of sitting with oneself and saying, "I am here and I am enough." After her retirement, Miriam felt lost. Her schedule, once filled with meetings and goals, was now blank. She wandered her house trying to find purpose, but it wasn't until she began to meditate, just 10 minutes a day, that she felt the ground beneath her again. "I didn't know," she said, "that my own presence could be this comforting." The inner home is built not with bricks, but with breaths, with silence, with self-compassion. It is the space you carry with you, always accessible, never dependent on outer stability. Creating this home takes intention. It means turning inward with curiosity, not judgment. It means welcoming your thoughts, not fighting them. It means learning to sit in your own company and feel whole. This doesn't require renunciation or solitude. It simply requires willingness to pause, to breathe, to return. In this inner home, you are not your past, you are not your roles, you are the awareness that has witnessed it all, and in that awareness you are free. Let the world change. Let the seasons pass, but let your true home be steady, quiet, sacred, and always waiting within. Part 9. Listening to the heart. At some point in life, especially after 60, we begin to hear the whispers of the heart more clearly. Not the heart that races with passion or breaks from betrayal, but the deep heart, the knowing heart, the one that waits patiently beneath the noise. This heart doesn't speak in commands, it speaks in nudges, in longings, in a quiet pull toward what matters most. And often, that voice has been waiting decades to be heard. In Buddhist thought, the heart-mind, called citta, is the center of consciousness. It is both emotion and awareness. It is the space where compassion arises, where wisdom blooms. When we ignore this part of ourselves, we drift. We live by roles and expectations, but when we pause to listen, something extraordinary happens. We begin to realign, to return. Derek, a widower in his 70s, had lived a life of service to others. A devoted father, a reliable friend, but he often felt an ache, something unfinished. One evening, sitting by a lake, he asked aloud, "What do I need to hear?" And his heart answered softly, "It's time to create." He began painting. Not to impress, not to achieve, but to express what words could not hold. In each brushstroke, he heard his heart's voice again. Listening to the heart is not about chasing desires, it's about honoring what is quietly true for you. A walk you've wanted to take, a forgiveness you've been holding back, a story you've longed to tell. The heart knows the way home, but it requires stillness to be heard. Make time each day, even just 5 minutes, to ask your heart what it needs. Then listen with tenderness, with trust, because the deepest wisdom you will ever receive will not come from books or screens or others. It will come from within. Let the heart be your guide, not the heart of fleeting emotions, but the heart of still truth. And in following it, you may find yourself not just living longer, but living truer. Part 10. Letting go with grace. As the twilight of life approaches, we find ourselves faced with a sacred task, the art of letting go. Letting go of roles we no longer inhabit, of places we may never return to, of dreams that no longer stir. And perhaps most gently, of the need to hold everything together. Letting go is not about abandoning what matters. It is about releasing what no longer serves the deeper truth within us. It is not an act of despair, it is an act of profound love. In Buddhist teachings, the practice of non-attachment doesn't mean we cannot love or care. It means we learn to hold lightly, to embrace fully while knowing we must one day release. Elaine, who lived alone after her partner passed, began a ritual each week. She would choose one object from her home to give away: a scarf, a teacup, a book she cherished. Each time she said, "It feels like I'm making space, not just in my house, but in my spirit." Letting go is spacious. It's not empty. It makes room for peace, for clarity, for what truly matters. We may grieve as we release. That is part of the grace, to feel deeply and then gently place it down. We let go of comparison, of regrets, of the story that says we should have been more, done more, known more. We let go of needing to prove, of needing to be needed. We begin to see that our worth has never been measured by our usefulness, but by our being. To let go with grace is to trust, to know that what is yours will never be lost. That what has passed through your life has shaped you, but does not define you. It is to open the hands of the heart and say, "I thank you, I release you, I remain." And in that release, we do not become less, we become light, we become free. Part 11. Reclaiming joy. There's a quiet misconception that aging means retreating from joy, that life's brightness belongs to the young, and that the later years are simply about reflection, not celebration. But this belief is far from truth. In fact, joy at this stage of life is not only possible, it is essential. The Buddha once said, "Joy springs from a mind at peace." And after 60, many of us have earned the wisdom and the stillness that allows joy to emerge more honestly than ever before. Joy now is not about excitement or excess. It is not a loud laughter at parties or the thrill of chasing newness. It is something gentler, truer, like sunlight falling through the leaves, like the warmth of tea shared with a friend. Like the moment you realize nothing is missing. Patricia, who once feared loneliness in retirement, began volunteering at a local library. She read stories to children each week. One day, a little boy fell asleep against her shoulder. She didn't move, she sat still, her heart swelling with a kind of joy she hadn't felt in decades. I remembered, she said, that I could still be a harbor. Reclaiming joy doesn't mean denying sorrow. It means allowing joy to exist alongside it. It means saying yes to the moments that brighten you. It means giving yourself permission to smile, to play, to be moved. Joy is a practice. It grows when watered with presence. When we stop measuring life by how much we've accomplished and start noticing how deeply we've lived. Sometimes, reclaiming joy is as simple as singing while doing the dishes, or dancing slowly with yourself, or planting herbs and whispering to them as they grow. In these later chapters, joy need not be grand to be real. It just needs to be yours, so open to it. Let it return. Let it rise like a forgotten song. Let it live in your gestures, in your routines, in your breath, because joy is not gone. It's just been waiting for your invitation to come home. Part 12, Teaching Without Words. There's a kind of wisdom that no longer needs to speak loudly. It does not try to convince. It does not aim to impress. It simply lives quietly in the presence of those who have walked the path and now stand as gentle lights for others. After 60, many find themselves surrounded by younger generations, grandchildren, caregivers, new neighbors, looking for guidance. And the most profound guidance often comes not through lectures, but through being. The Buddha taught that the most powerful teaching is the example of a peaceful mind, that we teach best when we live in alignment with what is true, when we embody patience, when we move through conflict without heat, when we meet uncertainty without panic. Evelyn, a retired seamstress, rarely gave advice to her family, but when her daughter went through a divorce, it was Evelyn's calm presence, her gentle meals, her steady breath, her quiet garden walks that offered more comfort than any words. This is the sacred art of teaching without words, of becoming the lesson rather than delivering it. You do not need to be an expert to inspire. You only need to be real. You only need to be rooted in yourself. Your silence can teach listening. Your slowness can teach depth. Your gaze can teach compassion. Your acceptance of aging can teach courage. And in doing so, you become a lighthouse, not by shining for attention, but by being steady in your truth. These years are not just for remembering, they are for radiating, for letting the glow of your presence ripple outward, gently changing lives even when no one says thank you. So sit tall, walk kindly, live honestly. You are teaching more than you know, and your life lived with care is a dharma in motion. Part 13, Seeing with New Eyes. Aging offers not only a shift in time, but a shift in sight. What once passed by unnoticed now captures our full attention. A simple flower, a stranger's smile, the slow dance of sunlight across the floor. This seeing is not with the eyes alone, it is with the heart awakened. It is a vision refined by years of living, by sorrow survived, by tenderness learned the long way. The Buddha said, with our thoughts we make the world. But with our awareness we illuminate it. We no longer rush past moments, we rest in them. Ramesh, a retired postman, began taking daily walks not to exercise, but to notice. He carried a small notebook where he jotted down what he saw: a yellow butterfly, a child skipping stones, a neighbor's kindness. The world hasn't changed, he said, I have. Seeing with new eyes means shedding the armor of judgment. It means meeting people and ourselves not with critique but with curiosity. It means recognizing beauty where we once saw only routine. A chipped mug becomes a companion. A wrinkle becomes a map. An old photograph becomes a doorway back to gratitude. This vision is a gift of age, not a failing but a flowering, not diminishing but deepening. And when we see like this, we bless the world. We stop trying to fix everything and instead begin to witness it fully, lovingly as it is. Let yourself look again, at the familiar, at the forgotten, at your own reflection, not with the eyes of youth chasing perfection, but with the eyes of presence whispering, "This too is sacred." Part 14, the gift of forgiveness. At a certain point in life, we begin to understand that forgiveness is not something we give for others alone. It is something we offer ourselves so we may be free. The longer we live, the more we accumulate. Joys, regrets, misunderstandings, betrayals, moments we wish we could rewrite, but time doesn't offer us the chance to undo. It offers us something more powerful, the chance to release. Forgiveness in the Buddhist tradition is not forgetting or condoning. It is a conscious decision to stop carrying the weight of the wound, to stop feeding the fire of resentment that scorches our own hearts. Consider Thomas, a father estranged from his son for nearly 20 years. One day he sat beneath the old oak tree in his backyard and whispered, "I forgive you, not because it was okay, but because I want to be at peace." Tears followed, not because the past was erased, but because he no longer needed to hold it so tightly. Forgiveness is a doorway to spaciousness. It creates room in the heart for love to return, for presence to grow, for a future unchained from the past. Sometimes the person we most need to forgive is ourselves, for not knowing better, for the harm we caused, for the time we lost. But even this too can soften. Sit with your younger self, speak gently. Offer compassion, say you were trying, you were learning, you are still worthy of love. Forgiveness does not mean we must re-engage with those who hurt us. It means we are no longer bound by their story. We return the power to our own hands and hearts, and when we forgive, not in haste but in honesty, we allow the pain to dissolve into wisdom. We let our scars shine like softened lanterns, lighting the way for others who walk behind us. Forgiveness is not weakness, it is the deepest strength. A heart that forgives is a heart that has awakened. Let that heart be yours. Part 15, embracing the sacred ordinary. There's a quiet holiness in the ordinary, one we often miss when chasing after the extraordinary, but with age comes a new reverence. The mundane becomes a temple. The overlooked becomes luminous. We begin to realize that the sacred is not only found in mountaintop moments or deep meditations. It's in folding the laundry with care, in the way the light rests on the kitchen table, in the sound of someone breathing beside you. Ajahn Chah, the great Thai forest monk, once held up a teacup and said, "This cup is already broken," not with sadness but with joy, because knowing its impermanence allowed him to cherish it fully now. So it is with all things. When we stop waiting for something bigger, we begin to see the blessings that were always right in front of us. Barbara, in her 80s, described her morning routine as her ritual, washing her face, lighting a candle, making tea. "It's not what I do," she said, "it's how I do it, with presence, with thanks." The sacred ordinary asks us to be here, fully, to bring our whole attention to a single bite of food, to the sound of birdsong, to the rhythm of our own breath. This kind of presence is not passive, it is radiant. It says, life is enough, this moment is enough. As we grow older, we no longer need life to dazzle, we want it to mean something. And meaning, we discover, is woven through the smallest acts done with a loving heart. So bless your routines. Turn chores into offerings. Let ordinary days be vessels of peace. Because when we live this way, nothing is wasted. Everything is part of the practice, and suddenly the whole world becomes your monastery. Part 16, coming home to yourself. At the end of all seeking, of chasing, of letting go, of learning and unlearning, there is a return. Not to a place, but to a presence. Not to who we were, but to who we've always quietly been. Coming home to yourself is the final gift of this journey. It is not dramatic, it does not announce itself. It arrives like the soft closing of a door long left open, a return to warmth, a return to stillness, a return to truth. In Buddhism, this is the essence of the path, to know yourself not as a collection of roles, not as the sum of your successes or your losses, but as awareness itself, spacious, awake, and free. This homecoming is especially poignant after 60. When the noise outside has softened and the space inside invites you inward, when you no longer need to prove or chase or hide, you can simply be. For many, this return begins with silence, with mornings spent in quiet reflection. With a slow cup of tea, not hurried, not distracted, with walks that have no destination but presence. Agnes, who turned 90, described it this way: I stopped asking what's next, I started asking what's here. Coming home is remembering that your worth was never tied to your doing, but your being. It's knowing that peace is not something you must earn, it's something you remember. It's the grace of sitting with yourself and realizing, I am enough. The path that brought you here, every joy, every sorrow, was never separate from awakening. It was the unfolding of your own lotus, petal by petal. Now in this moment you can rest, not in retreat, but in recognition of who you are, of what matters, of the love that still flows through you. And as you rest, you shine, quietly, fully, like a lamp in the night. You are home. Welcome yourself there. You've walked through 16 doors of reflection, 16 rooms of quiet truth, and if you've made it this far, pause, breathe. You've just taken a journey not just through ideas, but through your own becoming. Now ask yourself, are you ready to live the rest of your life awake? You don't need to change the world, you only need to change the way you see it. And that shift, dear one, is everything. If this message resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, leave a comment. Let's create a space where presence is power and aging is sacred. Subscribe for more journeys like this, because the road ahead is not shorter, it's deeper. Until next time, may your steps be light. May your breath be steady, and may your inner home always be near.